Hi, welcome and bienvenidos. My name is Dr. Veronica Alonzo, the Associate Superintendent for the Diocese of Dallas Catholic Schools Office. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to do some quick groundwork today, and in 30 seconds or less, I'm going to ask our guests, can you share with the audience, what does your company or organization do, and who does it primarily serve? I'm going to start off with Ana Maria.
Hello, my name is Ana Maria Chávez. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the National School Boards Association. We're an 81-year-old organization that represents 90,000 school board members who serve 51 million children in K-12 public schools.
Thank you. Daniel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Velasco. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Latinos for Education. And we focus on identifying, placing, and connecting essential Latino leadership in the education sector. And we do that through leadership pipelines, so sort of fellowships, as well as our national and local advocacy work.
Bienvenido. And last but not least, Stephen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wolfe Pereira, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Encantos. We are a global creator platform connecting kids with what we call story teachers. And we are serving kids from around the world, really helping to democratize learning through our platform.
Welcome. I'm going to first start off with Daniel. Daniel, as more and more people get vaccinated and school districts reveal their reopening plans, many people are talking about the desire to return to normal. But normal wasn't all that great to begin with for various reasons. What major educational issues did the pandemic reveal, especially as it pertains to our Latinx student population?
That's absolutely right, Veronica. I appreciate that. The reality is that our educational system was working to do exactly what it was engineered to do, to give a small swath of our population access to exceptional educational opportunities while leaving the majority of Black and Latino kids sort of out in the cold. So I think that one of the most important issues this pandemic has underscored is tech equity. Our children and families must have guaranteed access to broadband internet as sort of a standard mechanism for accessing education going forward. That was already an issue before the pandemic, and the pandemic has just kind of shone a light on that. Additionally, I think that this pandemic also underscores the monumental work ahead of us in building our teaching workforce's capacity to deliver quality blended learning. The future of education, as I think we all know at this point, will have to adapt to some degree of virtual or blended learning. And the time for us to act and put wheels in motion to develop our teachers is now.
Oh, that's great. Ana Maria, I'd like to hear your perception, especially with the work that you're doing at the board level, and not necessarily working directly with children, but what do you see?
Well, it's been interesting. What we have obviously seen during this pandemic year is that public education became the issue around the kitchen table in households across the country. And all of a sudden overnight, people realized, wow, there's a lot going on in my local community. How do I get engaged? So as our school boards took their meetings online, and as they started to engage community members online, more and more people realized that there was this gap in learning for some children. So over this past year, clearly we've been advocating at the federal level to ensure that there is money going to fix the issues around broadband access. I actually had the opportunity to speak to the acting chairwoman of the FCC yesterday, where we were talking about this issue and the multi-billion dollars that are being invested at the federal level. Of course, people need to know about these programs, they need to access them and apply for them. But I think moving forward, what we need to realize is we can't go back to March of 2020. And now that we know the data around specific communities and children in particular who've been left behind this past year, we've got to make sure that we are still creating inclusive, culturally responsive curriculum, that we give local school districts the flexibility to design a new way of teaching. And we need to understand that these schools are, in many cases, the ecosystem that they're holding families and communities together. And so we need to really come together to help them ensure that we can provide an equitable education system for all children in the United States, regardless of their zip code.
Oh gosh, amen. That is great. Stephen, Encantos, that is, for those that aren't familiar, tell them about it. And I also want to hear from you, where do you see Encantos kind of addressing what Daniel and Ana Maria have brought to the forefront?
Sure. Well, I so believe in everything that Daniela and Ana Maria were just talking about, but I feel like there's been a real interesting kind of reveal throughout the pandemic, which is that the kids are not learning 21st century skills. And I think it's really exposed not just, the tech inequities, but, the things that kids are going to need to learn during this AI era. The mantra is anything that can be automated will be. And so if you realize that the learning, literacy, and life skills that kids need to be successful, to thrive in the 21st century are not being taught in school. And so what you've seen throughout the pandemic is that parents that have means, they've actually hired teachers, they've hired tutors, and that personalized learning, their kids have actually accelerated throughout the pandemic. And they've realized that they need supplemental or ways to enrich their kids' learning at home. But think about all the other families that haven't been able to do that don't have needs. And so what are we trying to do at Encantos? We have really created this incredible platform to help democratize learning through something that is going to be accessible to all kids. I mean, there are 2 billion kids around the planet. Obviously, when you think about kids in America, over 50% of them are diverse. How do you actually have the cultural authenticity and the representation so these kids can see themselves in the ways they learn best? That is kind of what we are really focused on. And the whole idea is to take the learning, to continue it out of the classroom and into the living room.
Oh, there's lots of work to do. And knowing that we can accomplish this overnight, let's talk about what short-term and long-term consequences are going to be for our Latino children if their education continues to suffer, if we can't get the FCC and everyone to listen to what it is that we're telling with them. Let me start with you, Ana Maria. What will the upcoming school year look like for them? And then what are the long-term effects that our children, our future, will feel over the 5, 10, 15 years, for example?
Thank you for the opportunity to address this, because again, you can't waste this opportunity and the learnings that have happened over the past year. I think we've learned a lot, and I think it really has changed public education in general. First of all, we do know that we're going to have to think about how children come into the space a little differently. I had an opportunity to talk to Secretary Cardona, who is the Secretary of Education at the federal level, and we are talking about how do we ensure that all children enter safely back into the schoolroom in the fall, because many of us believe that is where they're going to get a lot of their, again, circle around them the services they need. And what we found out as well is that kids were not only learning in school, they were getting supportive services. Right, they were going home on the Friday afternoons with a backpack full of food for their families over the weekend. We were doing a lot more with families than we thought, I think, in past school years. So for me, I think the future means flexibility for teachers. I think we need to understand that there are a lot of, unfortunately, issues that came out around student health. Unfortunately, we're seeing data around obesity and reached epidemic proportions in the US, and clearly we're having to deal with those issues during the pandemic. And I think we need to understand that, again, this past year disproportionately impacted kids of color and kids living in poverty. So how do we ensure, again, that their parents or caregivers are getting the support they need to support their children in school? I think the other place we're going to see some changes is classroom size. I think we're going to see changes on how we recruit and retain diverse teachers. So I think there's going to be a lot of changes. I don't think we can go back to the old normal.
So what I'm hearing you say is that there's an opportunity for those of you that are out there listening to this session to lean in, to help, to get involved with these students within your communities. I'd like to hear from you, Daniel. What are some small ways in which those that are watching us at this moment can help get involved and help support them? They're going to say, I'm not a teacher, I don't know what to do. So let's tell them what to do. How can they help?
That's a great question. And I agree with you, Ana Maria, by the way, that I think we have to sort of think about how we re-enter and what services were already provided before that we need to bring back. But I can think of 3 things that folks can work on that can yield sort of long-term impact, right? Like if we invest in these things. First, I think that the greatest impact that we can take is to register to vote and/or vote to support education initiatives that strengthen access and equity in education. So pay attention to your local elections in particular, and work to elect school board members, legislators, state superintendents, or commissioners if they're elected in your state, that will center the needs of all students in their political platform, legislation, and policies, and that will actually talk about this along the way and that you can hold accountable. Second, I think that Latino leaders can also help our communities by serving as a resource or mentors or honestly just models for students. We can't be what we can't see, right? And it's important that if you're an engineer, a doctor, a teacher, or honestly any other profession that's traditionally not accessed by our community, that you find ways to connect to our youth, whether it be through mentorship programs, board service, or civic fellowship programs, and they exist all over the country. Finally, I think that Latino leaders can also engage in local advocacy efforts. As you know, something like 80% of every dollar spent in education is raised at the local level. So finding ways to amplify issues that impact our community will be important. So you can do this through, broad cross-section of stakeholders coming together to understand education issues. So you might want to, initiate a petition or make a call to your legislator or Congress member to understand your funding formula. These are all ways that we can advocate on behalf of our kids. And similar, I had the opportunity to talk to the secretary yesterday, and we were talking about how, he has this weight of being a Latino Secretary of Education right now. And that isn't a light burden to carry, but it's also important that our children see themselves in him, right? That honestly, it was a sort of an emotional moment yesterday talking to him, because it was like, this is why we exist, so that our children can see themselves at the highest levels of the sector. So I think those are three ways. There's a ton more, but for the sake of time, I think those are a handful that we can work on.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Daniel. Steven, same question to you. What are some of those small ways in which people can get involved?
Yeah, I love, the whole idea of having this be blended learning where it has to be digital and physical. I think what we all realize is that you just can't have a child in front of Zoom for 8 hours at a time. That doesn't work. But I'm also a realist, and I feel that, we need to look at the ways that, kind of the educational industrial complex, if you will, has its limitations. And people are taking, kind of matters into their own hands. I mean, today kids are learning on YouTube, they're learning on TikTok. And so I feel like there is a democratization in terms of who is a teacher. Teaching isn't just limited to teachers. And I feel like what we really focus on is if you have a story, you could be a story teacher. And so that's kind of our whole approach in terms of democratizing learning, that if you think about the 21st century skills that need to be taught, imagine creativity or critical thinking or financial literacy, environmental literacy, or think about what we just went through in this past election, civics. Civics isn't even taught anymore in schools. And then you think about the social emotional skills, the life skills around adaptability, resilience, grit, entrepreneurship, leadership. These are things that are not going to be taught in school, but you could actually learn in different ways. And so I think that if you can actually help, if you have something to help kids learn, go onto a platform like Encantos, go onto other platforms and actually share your knowledge and wisdom, because we really have to have this surround sound approach to learning, and learning is actually greater than education, and you can learn from lots of different story teachers.
Thank you. On a larger scale, let's think of our Fortune 500 companies. They're stepping up to the plate with some diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Mm-hmm. This conversation regarding education needs to be held. What message should we send to them, and how can we encourage them and their businesses to partner with our communities to ensure that our children receive a quality education for all, not just those that happen to know how to navigate the system? Ana Maria.
Yeah, I know. I want to jump in on this because it's sometimes hard to understand that this is actually for the long game, right? A kindergartner today who just went through the pandemic in 10 years will be in high school. And what will have transpired over that decade? How long will it take us to ensure that we not only came out of the pandemic, but we dealt with that learning loss over the last year? So that's what keeps me up at night. Are we really thinking about the long-term impact for our children? But two, I think businesses, corporations, anybody who's running a business should understand they need to be focused on what's happening in public education, education in general in the United States, because that is your workforce. We're preparing them to not only work for your company, but start companies, to be taxpayers. And I've worked on both sides of the aisle, meaning I've been in supportive services. I've worked for state government. Unfortunately, I have funded systems, whether it's foster care or juvenile corrections, where we were investing a lot, unfortunately, where the system just failed these children. I would rather focus our leadership attention, our community attention, in ensuring that all kids get an opportunity to be the best they want to be, whatever their dream looks like. So that's why I'm excited about talking today, to make sure we're connecting the dots for people. Yes, run for office. I totally agree with you. 90,000 school board members. Many times we can't even find people to run because people don't understand the importance of those roles. And I think even more so now, as we come out of the pandemic and the multi-billion dollars that have been allocated to the states to invest in education, I would hope that local taxpayers are watching how it's being invested, where is it going, and how are we going to track success? How are we going to know that this multi-billion dollar investment in public education actually had a great outcome on certain populations? So I'm watching it closely. I hope everybody is as well.
Stephen, knowing that you're in the business world, education world, you have a foot in each world. What can you share with your colleagues?
Yeah, I feel like we need to have some real talk about this, because I've been on this journey trying to have corporate America focus on diversity, equality, and inclusion for over 25 years. And so the reality is this is not happening at the rate that we need it to. And there's a lot of talk. I mean, everyone, when Black Lives Matter happened last summer after the murder of George Floyd, everyone did their Instagram post, but that was really this kind of corporate window dressing. And so we have to call it out. And as Latinos, our Latinx community is not vocal. We are invisible. We are the largest minority group in the country at 20%, but numbers don't matter. I mean, remember South Africa and apartheid, right? So everyone likes to talk about our numbers, but we don't have voice. We have to stop being invisible, and we have to demand more action. So as a community, we need to come together and tell folks, make the hire, send the wire. We need to have folks truly held accountable, and we as a community need to be a lot louder, because we cannot be the invisible minority. And that, unfortunately, is where we are today.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of platitudes and Hispandering. Don't do it just because of you're checking a box. Do it because it's going to be meaningful. All right, rapid fire question. We have a few minutes left, so it doesn't have to be that, but I'd like to hear from each of you in a quick sentence or two. What's the future of education? Daniel.
Well, I would be remiss if I don't double click on my two colleagues here. I think 100%, like, we have to find ways to decenter white dominant culture from the world. We have to get corporations to show up, really show up. I think that engage, there's opportunities out there right now. The future of education is going to be blended. I think we're going to have, in person, we're going to have virtual. And I think the future of education is Latino, because at the end of the day, we are going to be a third of students in the next 2 or 3 years. And so if we don't invest in our kids, our country will not compete. So I guess my call for the future is look out for those that are out there, like my colleagues. We'll be having a National State of Latino Education event in the fall with the secretary. Look out for that. Corporations are invited to be a part of that and to finally kind of come through. And I think that's sort of my take.
And probably go vote. I heard you loud and clear as number one. Your voice matters. Ana Maria.
The future of education, I think it's, again, giving local communities and local school districts the flexibility to create an inclusive, culturally responsive environment for all children to excel. I think a more focus on social emotional learning. I think it's, to Stephen's point, a combination of both in-person and virtual learning. These kids are global citizens, and so we need to allow them to learn very differently and know it's just not their backyard they're learning in, but they're learning across the globe. And I think it's also, we're going to need to start early. Early childhood education and literacy is so critical. So we can't wait until they get to pre-K. We actually have to start earlier.
All right, Stephen, few seconds, one sentence or two.
This is the AI era. and software is eating the world. I think everyone needs to realize that learning is going to be the currency. And when you think about the way that people are badging themselves, think about different types of certificates, think about the skills that they need to learn, I feel that you're going to see this incredible march towards democratizing learning.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. The future of education and Latino students, ensuring forward momentum. Remember, tu voto es tu voz. Gracias for joining us.
Gracias.